Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Human SOS Show, episode 99. We're clicking them out here, Anton. Uh, so we want to remind everyone to let us know where you're joining from. And even if you don't have a comment or question, let us know you're there. We like to see who all is part of our show. And so look forward to it. And Anton, you want to roll things out for us?
Good morning, everybody. As always, just want to start out and remind people you see this hashtag HumanSOS, and it stands for Human Sustainability Operating System. And Kevin and I show up here every week and we talk about some shape or form, how stress connects to everything that we're doing, and really that we're living unsustainably as a society and we have to course correct, whether it be in a personal life or in business life. And today we're going to be talking about self-sabotage and stress. It's maybe not exactly stress, or people don't think about it as stress, but it's an inefficiency in life. And just like any system that has inefficiencies, it's going to create stress on that system. And I want to ask everybody here, before I ask you, Kev, what is, like, how do you see people self-sabotage themselves? In what ways does it happen that you've witnessed in your life where people just get in their own way, whether it be mentally, physically, you name it, where they just stop their own progress? What do you think, Kev? What are some examples of that for you?
It's funny. We think this is a new concern or process. It reminds me of growing up and as a young preteen, my father would suggest that I do this or that or the other, and I would immediately come back with some "I'm not able to do it" reason, and he would say, you're always defeating yourself before you ever start. And as I was thinking about this topic, I'm going, yeah, I was self sabotaging a long time ago and still at times struggle with it. And it is uh, something we do to ourselves based on narratives that are not true quite often. So, welcome to Sharon and Olier and Shona and Atif. Glad to have all of you here with us today. Look forward to hearing your comments, especially about, have you seen or experienced self sabotage? Welcome, Rackable. Glad to have you.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. And for me, I'll give a couple of examples, right? Both personally and professionally. On a personal side, I see people self-sabotage their personal growth. I see them basically feel like they can't change. Me and Kev have been coaching for a long time. I've been in executive coaching space and health coaching space. And often I sit down with clients and we try to make plans. And these folks they won't commit. They won't want to really create a plan that puts some action versus just talking about it. The minute you try to actually get a little bit of action from these folks, they start to push back. They start to say they can't do it. And I talked a little bit about this the other day when we talked about change and when our body's assessing change and why contrast is important. Um, if a person's sitting there in front of me and they're going, you know what, like, I can't do this, I simply ask them, if I needed you to quit sugar for 30 days, but I paid you $1 million for it, would you do it? 100% would say yes. So the problem is not that you can't. The problem is you're getting in your own way because the reward isn't high enough, or you're not viewing that, with a high enough perspective. So that's an example of that, like where personal growth, people get in the way. In professional, self-sabotage to me is imposter syndrome.
Mm.
That's something that we sit there and we tell ourselves all the time, that this is, I'm not good enough for this new role that I got, or I'm not good enough for this, opportunity. I'm not good enough to lead this team, you name it. And we've put different names on it, but there's so many different things that go under the self-sabotage behavior. And it boils down to a few key points that I've kind of, as a coach, figured out over time, and it really boils down to our internal monologue. What are we saying in our minds when we are thinking about doing something or progressing in something? And it boils down to three kind of stories. The first story is, what do you think of yourself?
Mm,
Right? What is the narrative that is running through your mind about who you are as a person? And I want everybody just to pause and think that and make it real for yourself. Think about a situation where you are either currently self-sabotaging yourself or you have in the past. Try to slow down and become aware of, what am I saying? How have I defined myself? And really start to break that down, maybe even write it down. Sometimes it's good to write it down, come back to it later, and look at it through a different lens.
mm,
Often when we're initially doing that, we're in a very emotional state, maybe, and I talk about the limbic system a lot, which is not necessarily true for us. It just it lives in fear and survival. And then come back later and read that and try to put down facts around that that can disprove that, or point that you've written down there. So the first one is the story that you tell yourself. Any thoughts on that, Kev?
definitely. And one of the tests of what that really is for us is when we go into a challenge situation, a crisis situation. That's when we start finding out about what our real narratives are, what our real thoughts about ourselves, because that will drive our response. I use the same concept when we talk about leadership style. Uh, when you are under fire, so to speak, or challenged, or in crisis, your default person shows up. And that is very telling. And like Anton said, it's a good idea to write things down that you observe, and that's going to give you some insight into who you are. And when we start really looking at that, we began to find out where our narratives are true, because sometimes they are true and it's a place of growth. But many times it's not true because it's based on misinformation that we've allowed to come into our life and never checked it and filtered it. And so just taking the time to understand that. And of course, there are tools to help with understanding some of that as well. Different assessments, and those are helpful too. But if you don't take the time to learn what is your real narrative, you won't ever overcome it.
And the cool part is we control our narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are the ones that are telling the story. It's usually inaccurate. It's usually from a bad lens. And I honestly, folks, I think that we're all guilty of this. I'm not sitting here in a place that, oh, I know all this stuff and I don't do it myself. All the time I do it. When I got a new job and I felt a little bit overwhelmed because I was onboarding in two different places at the same time, with a current job and with a client. And I'm sitting there telling myself how I can't make this. This is too hard. Why did I switch jobs? That was a mistake. Instead of sitting there and realistically going, Anton, you're onboarding with two people, like two different companies that are massive, massive companies at the same time. Nike and Accenture. Like, one is a humongous brand and one is a 700,000 people company.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of clearly telling myself that, I'm going, oh my God, you screwed up. You're going to fail. You're going to end up losing your job. You're going to get fired. Your kids are not going to have a place to live. Like, you can't feed them. Like, all this stuff's going through my mind. Of course, temporarily, because I try to come back, ground myself. The very first thing that I do when I'm struggling with that is I ground myself. I come back to my breath. That's usually for me what helps. I'm really big into just breathing in a way that makes me really aware of my current present environment, not what's to come, not what has happened, but really in the current moment. And when we ground ourselves, we're able to start thinking with our, human brain, not our lizard brain, but our human brain. And I start to really break down and say, you know what, Anton, they hired you for a reason. Like, you came here for a reason. These folks thought you had the skills that you need. You may be lacking something right now, but in the past, every time you've been in a situation, you've learned. So I start having these different conversations with myself, and I break out of that.
Yeah, it's Anton, along those lines. It's funny because back when I was in the field I have a history with construction, and I was in the field, and not just stating, I'm gifted in that area, and I was very good at it, but there was always a challenge because one of the more difficult concepts that people don't quite understand in construction is building stairs. Okay, because of all the different requirements. And I had a situation, and I had built stairs many times and knew what to do, knew how to calculate it and understand it. And a friend asked me to help him at his home with his set of stairs, but his situation was especially complicated because there were two sets of steps and it was in a confined area, and that made a challenge. And I found myself putting off committing to helping him with that because in the back of my mind, I was just going, oh, no, you can't handle this. This one's too tough. And it took me a while to work through it. And just like you said, okay, I've done this before. Okay, it's not new. It may be that it's a little slightly different situation, but I've got the skill sets. But I had to evaluate my narrative and get in my head some and then figure it out, talk it through. So it shows up. And one of the symptoms of this is that we procrastinate. Mm-hmm. We don't want to commit or follow through because inside we're going, oh, you're a fake, you can't do it. And so it can show up in a lot of ways.
And it has to do with our own labels for ourselves. The word procrastinator triggered it in my mind. And a lot of times we'll label ourselves as procrastinators because we are behind on something. Instead of seeking the truth of why we're not actually starting, we just put that label on, and now we're wearing that label. And that's what it is for the rest of our life or for a long time until we figure it out, where there could be way more other things, way more deeper things. And it boils down again to that narrative and understanding why we're not starting. I think we got a comment.
Yeah, this is from Sharon. Sharon says, I had that happen to me, unfortunately, more than once. Years back when I didn't have self-confidence at all in myself. I worked for someone who was my manager. It was a brand new product AT&T was getting into. I just had a hard time learning this one project. My manager at the time, every night when no one was there, she'd say to me, you're so stupid and you're so dumb, you can't learn. I'm almost ashamed to say, hearing that that day in and day out, I started to believe it. I couldn't do it. She got cut off. The more I could do it, I probably, let's switch over to this. The more self-confidence I gained, the better I felt about myself. So real life self-sabotage and how we end up with it.
You know where I see, and again, this is coming from experience personally, where people self-sabotage themselves as parents. Mm-hmm. So something that just is human beings. We don't love doing something we're not good at, or more importantly, we don't love doing something we tell ourselves we're not good at. Mm-hmm. So what we do this as parents is we tell ourselves, I'm not a good parent. I'm not, good enough with my kids. And then we end up avoiding our kids. We end up not engaging with them as much. Or we'll say, I don't know how to talk to teenagers today, right? And we'll say all these things that are a form of self-sabotage that then creates a rift between us and our kids because we stop engaging with them as much because we feel so less when we do it because of our own monologue, not because of what they're saying. Because, we've talked about this on a show before. How do kids spell love? Time, right? And instead of giving them more of that time and showing them that love, we withdraw because it doesn't make us feel good because we feel like we're failing. So that's number one, right? So number one is the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. It's our internal view of our being, of all the different states that we have. The second one is an external view, and actually next to you are both external views. And that's the story that we tell ourselves about others, right? Usually inaccurate, but similarly, we place labels on people and, we tell certain stories about them and we think this is who these people are, right? Whether it be our leader, whether it be, somebody else, maybe it's our kids, maybe it's our spouse, maybe it's our friends. And it hurts us, right? It hurts us in the long run, even if we're sometimes accurate with it. Breaking past those labels is what's important, but most of the times we're not. So I talk about the story all the time when I was removed from a position back in 2017, almost wrecked my life. And I labeled this new boss that I had a certain way. I felt like I read him, I understood everything about him, and placed this label on him. But as soon as I labeled him, it stopped making me, or at least I stopped the effort of getting to know him. I stopped the effort of breaking past those initial barriers that he may have put up, understanding that he's in a new environment. I'm not an easy person because I exude confidence a lot of times, especially when I've been somewhere for a long time. And I was intimidating for him to work with. So instead of, putting the right thought into it, I was like, okay, this person's an egomaniac. He was hurt by his previous job, and now he's here to hurt my job because he wants to just run everything his way. So what did I do? Not build a relationship with him. So part of the problem with me losing this job wasn't just because he didn't like me. It's because I made no effort into putting into a relationship with him. And that was self-sabotage through somebody else. I still worked my butt off. I still did everything I could to do my job effectively. But because I placed that external story about somebody else incorrectly, and I put no effort into changing it or learning more about it, it hurt me.
Yeah. One of the things that we have to remind ourselves, just as our internal narratives are at best flawed and sometimes just downright terrible, that most everyone else is in the same boat. We are not one off. We're not odd in that regard. So when we're looking at others before we apply a label, we need to understand they're probably struggling with something similar to what we are, and to label someone or ourselves is just usually very defeating. And it's almost like saying, okay, I've got this one hat and it's the only hat I have, and so if I'm going to wear a hat, I've got to put this one on. And that's what labels are like. When we go, there's a whole lot of different hats out there that might fit me better and honestly look better on me. Okay, so go check that out. Consider that, and when you do that, when you stop accepting labels as a stamp of approval or disapproval, then you have a chance of digging in, finding out what's at the core, and actually overcoming it. And quite often, when we, just like with fear and anxiety, when we voice it, take the time to literally say, "This is how I feel," and we hear ourselves saying it, that alone is a big step to bringing those things into perspective. Because our minds, Anton, you've probably got an explanation for this, but our minds left to churn over things, including our narratives, without speaking it, will go unfettered and go all over the place. Whereas once we speak it, I don't know, is there a physiological explanation for that? And welcome, Zai, glad to have you.
Well, our mind works a lot slower when we speak versus when we think, right? We think
Okay.
millions of miles per hour. We only talk at a certain momentum. And by speaking something out loud, we also hearing it as well as just processing it mentally,
Okay.
right? So we're engaging a lot more, and ultimately we're becoming more logical, less emotional. Doesn't mean
Okay.
that that's, just all you have to do is speak and that's done. But
No.
the likelihood that you're going to be more present and more aware of of what you're saying, and really use your prefrontal cortex is much higher if you say it out loud than versus letting those thoughts run rampant in our minds.
Sure. Rick had a comment, by the way, don't let a negative manager define who you are. It'll eventually take a toll on your physical and mental health. Indeed, that's why a part of this is beginning to, as the Bible says, guard your hearts and your minds. Don't just let everything come in unchecked, unquestioned, unfiltered, because if we do let this stuff come in, it will take a toll in a big way. Atif has a question. Says, sometimes I feel uh, being kind, humble, and nice includes self-sabotaging in my HR career as HR head, because I find people in positions of power and authority ruthless and narcissist, and companies want such people in managerial role because they are able to get things done and able to manage upward successfully. They know intricacies of power grabbing and implement prints of Machiavelli successfully for their career success. Please enlighten. All right, you want to go first on that one, Anton?
Machiavelli, I get it. I understand. I've read the book, and it's still true that you can operate that way. Many leaders do operate that way. Unfortunately, it is no longer the most effective way, and more people are starting to see that. So it's like Kevin said, right? Sometimes these people have certain labels on themselves that we have to learn how to break down. And often those people that you're talking about, I used to be one of those people, have an ego issue. There is a big ego issue, and people like yourself who approach them with kindness sometimes can get burnt. But it's nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with them. It's imagine I sit here and I struggle with my ego, but I still call myself out on it internally. That's just the only way I know how to operate. It's the only way that I know how to maintain power, because God forbid I give up power, everybody's going to find out how weak I truly am.
Mm.
Right? That could be the narrative that's running through people's minds. And somebody like yourself comes in and acts with kindness, shows grace to people, shows support and uplifts people instead of pushing them down to elevate yourself up, right? What does that do in contrast for that person? It shows to them that their way is not the way. It shows to them that they're less. And these are people that can't be less. They think that if I'm less in this one area, I'm less all around, right? So so what I'm getting to is trying to see things from that lens and almost looking at them like somebody, it's like a sick person, right? They don't know any better. They can't do any better. That's their handicap per se. That's their illness, and still continue to approach them with grace. Now, at times they're going to burn you, right? They're going to take advantage of you. And that's where you have to learn to set boundaries. Kindness and boundaries are not separate things. They're not one and the other. You can be kind and firm. You can come from a good place, but still set a boundary and say, we are not going to cross over this boundary. I respect you, I value you, but at the same time, on the other end is you disrespect me and you devalue me, and we can't do that. And that's not an easy thing to do. Boundaries these days are harder than ever, but with these people, the less boundaries you set, the more they're going to take. The more boundaries you set, they're more they're going to respect you. That's just my experience with this kind of environment. I've been in it. I'm still in it, but it's becoming less prevalent. I think people are realizing in C-suite and just higher level leadership that being a hammer is not always a good thing, right? It's not the way to lead. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, Tiff, because I've been there, and I was kind of an interesting case at a point in my life, in that I could be the one that could be the hammer, and come across, and I thought, silly me, that I was actually being helpful because I was informative and I knew what I was talking about, and and all. But when I met or encountered another like mind, another like personality, then it created conflict. And it caused me ultimately to consider, why is this creating conflict? And ultimately, what I had to do was deal with my own internal narrative of self doubt that I was trying to prove otherwise to be. A lot of people that are in that behavior are trying to prove within themselves that they aren't what they believe they are, or aren't what someone else told them. And so, one of the most powerful ways to overcome it is to develop a level of confidence. And there's a process, and one of the first steps in that is recognizing our value. If we don't recognize and accept our value as we're created, you're going to struggle always trying to prove your value to other people. And so, getting that nailed down and then realizing that uh, nothing they're going to do is going to devalue you. You're able to, with more confidence and with less overreaction, to address the situation. And sometimes it's a matter of, if they don't cross the boundaries, of just letting it unfold. Because regardless, my value is established however it unfolds. So let it unfold. If they cross that boundary, you don't have to then overreact and get emotional and scream and yell and all that kind of thing. You quietly, confidently say, no, I'm sorry. That's not going to happen. And it's not acceptable, and make a stand. And when you do it in that fashion, you're still being kind. When you don't let your emotions cause you to overreact, that is sometimes the greatest kindness, when you finally say, no, that is not acceptable. And the hope is that at that point, that person will also go, okay, why am I in this situation? And it'll force them to consider themselves in regards to the narratives and the relationships. And it can be tough, because sometimes we have to let things unfold and just step back. And that's hard, because especially if you're, I know me, I'm a fixer, and it's hard for me to just let it unfold and people fall on their face and things happen. But I'm finally learning that being a fixer all the time is not the way to go. And just for a little extra insight, if you're a husband and a spouse, it's that's another one you need to learn, because quite often the ladies in our lives don't want us to fix it. They just need us to listen, and that's even harder too. So, welcome, Richard. Glad to have you.
You know, where see the word narcissist, right? And that Tiff used the word narcissist, and the reality is, it's a hard reality, but this is the truth, folks. And most people of position, especially that make a lot of impact, have narcissistic tendencies. Presidents, CEOs, you name it, in order to get to that level of visionary, because that's what it takes. You have to believe in yourself enough to fight against the world to have that vision brought to life. Now, the good ones have done the self-work to calm those tendencies, to understand them, to leverage their skills different way. The bad ones rode the success to the top, and they never checked themselves. They never really learned how to check those narcissistic behaviors and learn how to work with other people. So you're not wrong in that situation, but unfortunately, I don't think it's going to change in that aspect. The other solution, or the other advice I would have, is, because we've talked about these folks' ego, it's usually about credit. They want the credit for things happening in a positive way. You know, something that went down, give them the credit. Because the reality is, people around them that are not like them are going to see your involvement. They're going to see your impact. Especially if it's to do with, HR and people and talent management in general, they're going to see that the HR head is responsible for that. But you're sitting there feeding the other person's ego, saying, you know what, without person X, I don't know how we would accomplish this. I don't know if we would have had the leadership necessary to make this happen. They are the firmness that we needed, whatever it may be, right? But give them the credit. It's hard because you feel like, well, I'm not going to advance in my own career if I keep giving away credit. And in the past, when I've done it the right way and I've given it away and working with those people, I continue to succeed. When I became stressed out, when I became focused on all the wrong things, I started to want to seek that credit. I started to want to have my little attention on me, on my accomplishment, because otherwise, how would I move up? And that's when the career went downhill. So those would be some things that I would recommend. The last one, I'm going to have to drop here pretty soon, folks, but I just want to make sure I cover the last one. And that's your story around your life. right? Like that's Kevin talks about vision and mission and purpose a lot. And that's a very big picture. What is the story that you tell yourself in general about life? Your meaning of it, life's meaning, whatever it is. Is it just a hopeless thing where you live and then you die and that's it? Or is it perhaps that Lord put you on here to create a purpose and he's working through you to make change in this life? Just sit here and say those things one next to the other. Which one makes you feel like I am not going to self-sabotage myself? I am going to work on this and keep moving forward because I may not see it right now, but there is a plan for me that will materialize later on. I may not realize that this pain I'm enduring right now is for a reason until later, 10 years down the road, I look back and I see, I get it. I see it. So that third point is how you view life.
Yeah. And having that vision as the kind of an anchor that you can always come back to is real key. Anton, I know you need to roll here, so I'll keep things rolling and take care of your family.
Bye, folks. That's not family, it's work.
Oh,
But
okay. Well, that too. That's part of taking care of your family
I
anyway.
got East Coast clients now, so I start early sometimes. But
Okay.
all right, folks, thank you so much. I'll see you all next week.
Thanks, Anton. So, yeah, those three areas, the narrative about ourselves personally, narratives about about others, and then narratives about our life in general. And those are key points to really consider in order to avoid self sabotage. And it is something that is a challenge to do. And one of the things that when you're dealing with a narcissist personality is to remember that our strength is not trying to go from strength against strength with a narcissist, because that is 99% of the time ineffective. And what we need to do is our strength as a confident leader in whatever we do is in our humility. And again, if we are confident that our value is established, then the need to fight to establish our value or our place becomes secondary, because we've chosen to humble ourselves in around other people. And that's not based on whether they deserve that response or not. It's based in that is the right way to behave. And just so you'll know, again, I've been around a pretty good while. Those folks appear to always, should I say, get away with their behaviors. But at some point, every one of us that do that will eventually get humbled, because that is a principle of life, and they will get humbled. We may never see it, but rest assured it will happen because it is a principle in life. And Richard makes a comment. He says, important to understand the relationship between our amygdala, cerebral cortex. One deals with motion and the other with the conscious thought. And that's something Anton talks about, our lizard brain and all the effects of that. And just taking time to recognize that's going on helps us to, when we get in crisis, to respond. And so quite often when we get out of the crisis, we stop considering things. And as a result, we miss the opportunity to learn what we can from where we need to learn and grow internally. And sometimes one intervention for yourself, along with just thoughtfulness and writing things down. Good morning, VJ. Glad to have you. And is to talk to a mentor, a wise friend. And that's why it's valuable to have those people regularly in our lives so that we can just really be honest and talk through what we struggle with inside. And the other part is getting quiet. And that's a real scary thing for many of us, especially men. Ladies, you all are much better at a lot of internalizing and considering some of the emotional components of it. And we have to watch and learn from you quite often. But getting quiet with ourselves and our narratives and all of that, and then having someone that we can work through that with. Many times we can do that with a mentor or friend. Sometimes, though, depending on where we are in that struggle, we need a coach. And in some cases, we need professional medical help in regards to it. And that's part of those struggles. What is a good thing to do is, unfortunately, we will see symptoms before we understand the causes quite often. So watch for symptoms that you're self-sabotaging. Another one of those is being on the defensive all the time. If you are always responding to people defensively, then you're self-sabotaging. It is a fact, because you're self-sabotaging is causing you to want to defend a situation against you're defending yourself to yourself, but it happens to engage other people. So if you're staying on the defensive, especially in Atif, the situation you shared about is very common, that when we're around like people, we rock along pretty well and can work within our self-sabotage without much threat. But when we're threatened by other personalities, other people, and then if our response is to become defensive, there's a good chance that we're living self-sabotage. We're believing and have accepted narratives and labels that need to be considered and checked. And by the way, some of the labels or questions that we have in our lives are true. And I give you an example, personal example, is I love to sing and I love music. And in my more challenged moments, I look and I envy those that can play musical instruments and sing. And along the way in life, there are people that, whether they do it with the best of intention or not, will make statements about us and help us with reality. And in my case, again, y'all may find this silly or amusing, but when I'm driving down the road and listening to some favorite music, I'll start singing along, sometimes without even thinking about it. And fortunately, my family, my children in particular, were very helpful to let me know that was not my strength, shall we say. In other words, you can't sing. And for a while, and at first, that hurt. And then I realized it's not it hurt meant hurtful. It's the truth. And when I finally began to accept that about me, that I'm limited in some ways, and that's okay, because everybody can't be everything all the time. And so once I began to recognize that and accept it, then I did two things. One, out of consideration for my family, I would choose when I would sing. And in fact, recently I was traveling late one night from one city to another, and I was a little bit tired. So my way of keeping awake and alert, I had on some favorite music, and I'm going down the road singing, Richard, like you said, as loud as you can. I'm singing and moving around to the music and all that. But I made a choice not to put my family through that, or friends that are in the car with me. So labels that are true, accept them. Say, yeah, I'm not a good singer. I'm not going to be, and that's okay. And when we do that, that gives us a freedom to also accept, hey, I'm good at this or that or the other. It's a gift I have or a talent I have. And when we start doing those things, we, uh, when we recognize our limitations, that's not self sabotage, that's reality. When we are challenged in what we know is true about ourselves, our gifts, our talents, and people challenge them, we then are in a place to not accept their challenge about it. Or if they challenged us in an area that we know we have a strength in, sometimes what they've observed is where we can grow better in an area that is a strength. And when we again aren't trying to prove ourselves, we're not focused on being right and proving ourselves and proving others wrong, we can then hear the the little bit of truth that might be contained in a poorly delivered message. And when we do that, that's when we can grow more, when we can become better at whatever we're doing. And that especially happens out in work, because that's when we're in a position to be challenged, because we know we each have certain expectations of us as an employee. Other employees, sometime, depending on the relationships, will, in their own self-sabotaging approach, will then try to challenge us, and they'll find something even in our strength that could we can grow in, and they'll comment on it, fair or unfair. And when we are not living self-sabotaged, when we are accomplished and confident in who we are and what we are, then rather than focusing on the part where it's not true, we can find the kernel of truth that's in there and go, I really could improve in this way or that way. And so let me figure out how I can do that better. And by the way, when you respond to those people and can go through this process in your head and you go, I think you're right. I've got something I can improve here. Quite often you disarm them and at least stop them from being uh, rude in their delivery or whatever. And then in the end, it is a possibility that part of your value there is going to be you'll get to relate to them in a way others don't, and can possibly help them overcome some of their self sabotage. Anton referred to giving credit. Well, when we are under attack, and most of it is not true, but there's a little bit of truth, and we can work through it ourselves and recognize the truth in it. And even, as Anton said, give them credit for the little bit of truth that's there. The relationship many times shifts and changes. And even someone that is narcissistic, and quite often that's again a self-sabotage symptom, then at a minimum you disarm them and their ability to affect you or run over you. But you also potentially then open a door to be able to help them begin to deal with their self-sabotage. The hideous thing about self-sabotage is that as we go along, we begin to have that, we hear our own voice saying it, our own mind saying it. And that's when it's especially tough, because then we've started believing it, and started wearing the label. And the goal is identify the labels. If they're true, accept them. If they aren't true, they're born out of uh, bad narratives we've received in different times, or we're getting a bad narrative in that particular point, then deal with it and process it and reject it. And as we do this, especially as we do this logically, then we can cause our own minds to to use a biblical term, renewed. And so just consider self sabotage. Most of us have it going on in one way or another. Uh, some are more effective and efficient at self sabotage than others. I've been, by God's grace, blessed to a point where I don't self sabotage as much. Still struggle with it, but most of the time I have, by taking the effort to renew my mind, find what is the true narrative about me from multiple sources. That now I am to a point where when those false narratives, those self sabotage come along, they stand out and they're less likely to sneak in, if you will, and undermine what is going on with us and us accepting that as an accurate narrative. Zaid makes a comment, I think both parties should be aligned in what they're doing. If we're pushing someone to grow while they're not able to go for more, then the pusher should also understand the problem and why, and the why behind it. Understanding the why always is a plus rather than labeling it. You're very right. And in a business setting, the why we have our personal why. But if in a business setting we are all gathered around a shared vision, then we can come back to that as a place to operate from, and deal with the business components. And then once we can agree on that, find that common ground, then the potential is that we can deal with the things that we're not holding in common, because we have a place to relate rather than everything being based on where we don't relate. And in a well-run team, the opportunity to do those considerations, take those considerations that Zaid's mentioned, becomes more prevalent, because the goal then is to obtain that shared vision. And that can become the focus on for both of the parties involved, rather than what we disagree about or what we don't like about one another or whatever. And when we can find that common ground, then it slows things down to where we can deal with the others in a better fashion, more rational, less emotional. And the sooner that both parties can become more confident in themselves, and not always being on the defensive, trying to prove something, in particular, trying to prove the value. Again, I know now even when people come at me with accusations and names and threats and things, I don't care what they do, they can't take away my value as a person, because they didn't give it to me, so they can't take it away. And so from that vantage point, it takes the defensiveness out of it for me, and I can respond the right way to them regardless of what their behaviors are. Let's see. Sharon makes a comment. Let's see. I believe that's no, I'm sorry. Welcome, Navarra. Glad to have you with us. Self-sabotage and self-esteem both need continuous, thoughtful work in day-to-day life. you are so true. And that's, you're correct, Nivara, because that is the way or why we nurture all aspects of our being on a regular basis. And when we fail to do that, we start having unhealthy responses as a result. And so you're right. Not just identifying and adjusting where we need to, but continually feeding ourselves accurate, correct narratives that go on in our minds and that we deal with on a daily basis. When we do that, yes, we are going to relate better and be more effective in who we are and what we're about. Um, let's see. ATIF says, Dr. Kevin, the involuntary monologue also leads to self-sabotage. By observing our thoughts and not believing in them opens the door to nirvana. However, our mechanical and involuntary thoughts are quite persistent. Oh, no doubt. And that's especially true. And the reason that we don't like to get quiet is when we start hearing those monologues going on. But in order to keep them from persisting, we have to observe them, we have to recognize them, and then determine whether they're valid or invalid. And that takes time, and it takes quiet. It takes disconnecting from our distractions from this. And that's why there's so much value in making time in our routine to get quiet and to look at these narratives and the monologue that's going on in our head. And it should, in fact, the ultimate goal is that those narratives that are going on in our head should never be allowed to be monologue, because if they're a monologue, that means they're going unaddressed and unconsidered. We should have internal dialogue to evaluate. And sometimes, again, there's value in bringing that monologue to the surface as a dialogue with a mentor, with a coach, with a wise friend that can help us address this monologue, turn it into a dialogue with different inputs. Just very practical ways to do that. One of the things that I have learned over the years is involvement in groups such as, for me, I like to be engaged with other men, and taking time, intentional time, to be able to deal with these monologues that go on and validate or invalidate them as appropriate. So very important. Self-sabotage shows up a lot of ways: procrastination, defensiveness, inability to commit, inability to act. There are a lot of symptoms that all come back to the problem of self-sabotage, and recognizing the symptoms begins to help us dig down and deal with the root. Quit putting band-aids on major wounds. And unfortunately, that is the how we have been conditioned in our culture, is to treat symptoms, make it feel better for the moment. And ultimately, just like with a physical wound that is not treated correctly, it will become infectious and eventually cause even irreparable physical damage. In the same way, we have to really be careful with these kinds of infections internally, mentally and emotionally and spiritually. So very important to be observant of ourselves and look internally. A suggestion: one of the most powerful ways to help promote this internal introspection, and it's powerful, and it's not always everybody's thing, but one of the highest success rates in addressing some of these or recognizing some of these issues is getting out away from people and things, and where we can just have time being surrounded by natural creation. What, a walk in the woods somewhere, a walk out in an open area, or even just getting out and by yourself around the ocean. One of the things that I do sometimes, it's really quite helpful. And it's again part of being exposed to nature, is having a nice fire in the fireplace, or even outside a campfire, and just sit and look at it. And that seems to be a common way for most of us to be able to uh, get to a point where we're recognizing and delving into some of these internal narratives that we're dealing with. And so if you get a chance to get away, even if you're not an outdoor person, find ways to uh, reconnect with creation. And by the way, part of the reason it's effective is when we truly reconnect with creation, we also reconnect with our creator and get perspective. It's if you really take time, just sit on a beach somewhere and watch the ocean waves. And when you just sit and be still and observe them, you begin to go, wow, there is a big world out there, and it's all a lot bigger than I am. Doesn't mean I'm less important, but it helps bring my problems into perspective, that my challenges, my concerns, my fears, anxieties take on different perspective, because when we start looking at it and as part of the bigger picture, and in terms of life and in terms of eternity, then the problems become much lesser. So as we go on, consider, are you doing and reacting the way you do and are because of self sabotage? And are you maybe not where you want to be because of self sabotage? And maybe those around you are behaving the way they are, and acting and all the way they are because of their own self sabotage. And if we can recognize that and consider that, our responses to their self sabotage doesn't have to be based in our self sabotage as we consider it. And then on the whole, just take time, engage in opportunities for you to consider self sabotage of our life in general. And that's where we begin to reassess our values, our priorities, and start answering the real why that we need to really drive forward. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate your being here. Your presence is always an encouragement to Anton and I. We appreciate you there. And when you share and ask questions, that's even greater. So thank you for that, and hope that you'll join us next week. Next week will be episode 100. We will be trying to do something special to recognize the 100th episode. Don't know exactly how that's going to unfold, but we'll keep you informed. In the meantime, also, if there are topics that you want addressed as us as Perspective Force, let us know. We love when you suggest a topic, because if it's on your mind, it's probably on several people's minds. So feel free to offer that up as a suggestion. Always looking forward to that. So thank you, everyone. And God bless you in your week as you move forward. and look forward to the 100th episode next week. Watch for an announcement about the details, and I hope that you can be back with us and bring others as well. So take care. Have an amazing week. Thanks for being here and being a part.